They call this a mortar board, which I think is an appropriate name for it. It's not just a laurel for all the hard work that you've done to date. It's the slate that you'll be working from as you build the rest of your lives brick by brick. That's how I wanted to start my student commencement speech when I was a senior graduating from this college in 1993. Unfortunately, I didn't tell anybody that I wanted to do that. I thought it would just maybe be conferred upon me. It was not. If part of the purpose of a commencement speech is to give advice, let that be my first suggestion. If you want something, you should probably at least attempt to get it. Unless it's like revenge or something. Luckily, my classmate, Laura Heinerfeld, did an amazing job. I'm going to talk about my own experiences up here some because they're what I have at hand. Obviously, any individual person's life is the most anecdotal of anecdotes, but I think it might help make a point that I wish someone had made to me when I was graduating. Whenever anyone asks me what I majored in college, I always make the same joke, which is that I say theater and creative writing, both very lucrative fields of study. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I left here. I knew I wanted to write. I didn't know about what. I figured I'd go into publishing to support my writing, but I didn't know what people in publishing did. So I sent out all of these cover letters that made no sense, accompanied by a resume that featured zero relevant experience. I fell into public radio by accident. Literally, my best friend's girlfriend at the time had a friend who worked at WBUR in Boston and said there were internships there. I was 25, so this was about 4 years after I graduated. And I figured, what the hell, maybe I'll get a good letter of recommendation that'll help me apply for jobs, publishing. But I instantaneously fell in love with making radio. Talking on the radio is even more satisfying to me than back when I was on stage. In the broadcast business, we actually call it performing. We call the stories we write for radio scripts. Writing a radio script takes a bit of the rigor of writing a poem, and you do well in my profession if you write imaginatively, not to say creatively. Perhaps you can see where this is going. I didn't know when I was attending Marlboro that I was actually training for this job I would end up passionately wanting to do. Does everybody know the movie The Karate Kid, the first one? There are many Karate Kids now, but the one with Pat Morita and Ralph Macchio. I think about that movie all the time. It's dated, but it also contains within it a truth that people don't tell you when you're graduating from college, so I'm going to tell you. So, briefly, Danny LaRusso, played by Ralph Macchio, goes to the karate master, Mr. Miyagi, and he's played by Pat Morita, and he says, I want to learn karate. And Mr. Miyagi says, okay, sure, but first, wax all my cars, sand my floors, paint my fence, both the slats and the trim, and you have to do it in this special way, right? Wax on, wax off, breathe, repeat, conscious movements. And after a while of this, Ralph Macchio feels like he's being exploited, so he goes and confronts Mr. Miyagi, and he says, what the hell, man? I thought you were going to teach me karate. And Mr. Miyagi says, I am. And he starts throwing all of these punches and kicks at him, and Ralph Macchio's like, wax on, wax off, paint the fence. He blocks every single throw. And he's like, oh, I know karate. I didn't know I was learning karate. I didn't know I was learning karate. This has happened to me in my life over and over again. My boss, Ira Glass, will tell you that I turned down the job at This American Life 3 times before I finally came on staff, which is the truth, but not the whole truth. What he conveniently forgets is that prior to that, I applied for the job 4 times over the course of 10 years and was turned down every single time. Until finally something in me said, I better come up with other dreams because this one's not coming true. And so I did, and I set about trying to achieve them. And then in 2009, Ira called and asked if I would fill in on staff for someone who was going on maternity leave. And I almost said no, because now there were all these other things I wanted to do. And I got a little frustrated with him on the phone, and I said, Ira, I thought you didn't think I could do this job. And he said, well, that was a long time ago. You've become a really senior producer. And I thought, when did that happen? All the time I was out there in the radio wilderness producing stories for other shows, entertaining myself as best I could, being as creative as I knew how. All those years, I was learning karate. My point is, things come around. It may take a while. It may take a long time, but they come around. Don't stop wanting to do what you want to do because someone says you don't know how to do it. Because what that person is really saying is, you don't know how to do it yet. And writing and performing are not the only ways in which this place inculcated me with surprisingly marketable tools without my knowing it. Kevin mentioned the story I did about Whitman and Leaves of Grass for Studio 360, and I just want to play the very beginning of that story because I think it makes the point. This is how it started.
This is a facsimile of the first edition.
Oh, wow. T. Hunter Wilson is the guy who first turned me on to Leaves of Grass. He was my poetry professor at Marlboro College in Vermont. And yes, he and I are such Whitman geeks, we can even get excited about a facsimile. It's almost an exact duplicate of the original.
It's about 8 by 12, something like that.
8 by 10.
So there's a kind of even visual generosity to it.
Let's skip ahead a bit here. I'm talking about how there's no author's name on the title page of the first edition.
It just says Leaves of Grass, Brooklyn, New York, and opposite that, a picture.
Oh, there he is.
That's not what a 19th century author is supposed to look like. This is a hayseed. This is slightly baggy pants, standing with the hand cocked on his hip, his hat pushed back, looking sort of as if he's about to say, well, that's an interesting point of view.
Does that sound familiar at all? It's basically a tutorial. And this story was assigned to me, but the thing is, I wrote 50 pages on Leaves of Grass over there in the science building as part of my plan when I went to school here. And back then, no one in the world could have convinced me that 20 years later, instead of paying tens of thousands of dollars a year to come here and talk with T. Wilson about Walt Whitman, I would be getting paid to talk with T. Wilson about Walt Whitman. It is the most ridiculously on-the-nose example of using your college degree I can think of. Things come around. But here's the real way in which all that time at Marlboro I was actually learning karate and you've been learning karate. Here's the superpower this place has given you. You have learned how to obsess about something, to focus on one thing for an extended period of time and labor for long, difficult hours over months and months to produce a hardbound collection of orderly ideas about that thing. My dear new siblings, that was hard, what you did. You have already achieved something that initially seemed impossible. You went through the kind of strangling panic that can only be induced by work. You thought you might have to push your deadline. You didn't. Or, God bless you, you did. You actually asked for help because you were realistic. A karate master from someplace else entirely came to campus and threw a bunch of punches and kicks at you, and you anticipated them all. There are ways you don't know about yet in which you're already prepared, more than a lot of people, for the big tournament at the end of the movie. So really, more than advising you, I simply want to reassure you, you will be fine. We Marlboro grads do really interesting things. Do you want to know why they asked me to come and give this commencement speech? Because I'm the only one who wasn't either out of the country or busy saving people's lives. And sometimes you won't have been able to predict in a million years the interesting things you'll wind up doing, as in my case. And yet, because I learned how to obsess and stay up all night and care, I was prepared. And in my case, the interesting thing I wound up doing is what allowed me to give the commencement speech at Marlboro College graduation, which is precisely what I had wanted to do in the first place 26 years ago. Things come around. So don't worry. Don't worry. I'm so honored and grateful to have this chance to talk to you. I've met a bunch of you. I couldn't be more excited, about how y'all are going to benefit the world. Congratulations. Off you go. Thanks.